This is Scenic Roots Talking Writing. Our guest is Robert Gwaltney. Robert is Vice President of Easter Seals North Georgia, a non-profit program focusing on children between birth and 5 years old, living at or below the poverty line. Robert's just published his first novel, The Cicada Tree, set in a small town in Mississippi in the 1950s. There are three families in the novel: the Newell family, Annalise, her mother Grace, and her absent father Claxton, Annalise's friend Etta May and her grandmother, and the wealthy, almost aristocratic Mayfield family, their daughter Melissa and her mother Cordelia. The story is told by Annalise, and the plot turns in large part on her growing fascination with the Mayfields and their way of life. I think part of the attraction of your book for me is that you are sympathetic to the idea that we all have hopes and dreams, but we all have to compromise them. Mm-hmm. That's just the nature of this life.
Right. Absolutely. And nothing comes without a price.
You grew up in a small town.
I did, yes.
You alluded at one point to your sexuality. Mm-hmm. And that was an influence on the way you write.
Yeah.
Is that because, well, let me put that in the form of a question. What is it like to grow up a gay man in a small town in Georgia?
Sure.
In your life?
In the 70s, right. Well, and when I say, grow up gay, it's the knowledge that I was.
At what point does that come with puberty?
There was a sense that I was not quite like the other boys in that, my interests were dissimilar from as early as preschool. But, attraction, I think, for and sexuality comes about, in puberty. So I think it's probably around then that you definitively know what that is, that sets you apart, and that others sense as well. I think that for me, the struggle was, it was not that I was, like today, it's much easier to say, I guess I'm a young gay person, and we've come so far just since the 90s. And a lot of that has to do with positive representations of gay people in the media and in entertainment. But of course, for me, it was a secret, a huge gothic secret, really, that could, upend your world. And just, the other perceptions of you and that cruelty that comes with that. So I think that shapes my worldview. And, and you are a bit on the fringe. Now, to look at me, you would, this is a white fella who is college educated, and there's privilege, and certainly there is. I've not had struggles because of color. There's struggles that, people don't always see, certainly. But it certainly it certainly presents challenges, and I think that it impacts your worldview. I think, and I wouldn't change it for anything, I think that when you sort of sense yourself on the fringe of the world, you become an observer and a listener, and I think you're more sympathetic to others in the world around you. And I think that's, had I not had that experience, who even knows if I would want to write novels? I don't know.
I would tend to agree with that. I think writers artists generally, I think, tend to be outsiders. But it interests me, and this is from the perspective of a heterosexual male. I'm not sure that sensibility and sexuality have anything to do with each other.
Yes, that's probably very, very much true. So sensibility. Because I have a lot of great gay friends who aren't nearly as sensitive as I am. So yeah, I don't think that they necessarily go hand in hand. I think that environment probably has a lot to do with that. Coming from a small town, I think that everyone knows everyone, and there's a sincere interest in the lives of others, and there's a slower pace, I suppose. So I think people are kind, and for the most part, when some things are not quite so kind. But yeah, and then of course, my parents, I think, your parental unit, really early on has a huge impact on who you become later in life. It certainly can set you off on a positive trajectory, or it certainly can hold you back. And my parents still reside in Cairo, Georgia. They're still married. So I always had a sense of security and a sense that I had family that loved me, and lots of positive female influences, mom, my grandmothers, and my aunts, and then just a lot of wonderful friends who were girls growing up. So I think that helped. Well, I think that my interest in how I played, the music I listened to, what I would want to watch on television, aligned me to have those strong female relationships and friendships because there were those commonalities. So I would imagine that probably, that did drive, my sensibility and how I see the world.
Yeah, because I think, it's becoming increasingly a commonplace that effectively we're all on a spectrum.
Yes.
And our sexuality.
We're learning that. I mean, just in the last 5 years, it's astonishing, isn't it? That spectrum of sexuality.
But it's so true.
And gender identity.
Yeah. And for that matter, the notion that somebody is autistic, for instance.
Yes.
There's no such thing, right? It's a broad spectrum. And so it strikes me that sexuality is equally a broad spectrum, and somehow that's become confused with gender identity.
Mm-hmm.
And the assumption that somebody who is attracted to somebody of the same gender must be...
Sure. You're right. And they're two separate things. Sexuality and gender are quite two different things. We're learning.
And the things, and as you say, the interests that you embraced are often the things that girls are interested in: fashion,
right,
classical music, and opera. That's not. I don't really see that as gender related at all. No. But
only in rural small town Georgia. Yes.
It was only the women that listened to classical music,
right? Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and. So all of those realities play out in your novel. So when you are, and it's interesting to me, as you were saying, as you conceive the novel, and your conception of the novel changed radically from when you first started.
Right.
It's in a way a kind of coming to terms with who you are and your life. I
think that you are. When I started that novel that eventually became Cicada Tree, I wasn't sure in my writer voice. I was finding my way, trying to figure out, what. And there's this moment that it clicked where I thought, oh, this is who I am as a writer. And then that's when things shifted for me, and then that's when I began to write the Cicada Tree. Absolutely. And I think that the writer that, and I think that most writers will say this, you are one writer at the beginning of a novel, and you're quite a different one at the end, and you hope that continues, because there is a journey in figuring out the story and the characters, and you hope with each passing page you're a little better than you were the page before.
Is this the first time? This isn't the first time you've written an extended piece, right?
Right. So this is my debut novel. So this is the first extended piece that will be published.
What did you write up to that point? Did you write short stories?
I would write short stories, chapters, bits and pieces of things, a couple of beginning of novels that I would, they just weren't working, and I put them to the side. And all of those things are really a sandbox for learning how to write and find your way through how to tell a story.
Okay, so you grew up in a relatively small town.
Yes.
You left home to go to college.
I did. So I grew up in Cairo, Georgia, which is maybe about 45 minutes from Tallahassee, Florida. So I went to Tallahassee and attended Florida State University. And so from there, so I graduated high school in 87. I attended college from 87 through 91. And from there, I lived in Tallahassee, Florida, and worked in state government and human resources until 2000 when I moved to Atlanta. And it was shortly after moving to Atlanta, and writing is something that I'd always wanted to do, and I loved literature in high school, and I loved writing essays, and I took creative writing classes in college, and I just always felt like, the insight that there was a storyteller that I might be able to write novels, and of course, life gets in the way. And you think, well, I'll start that tomorrow. And so when I got settled in Atlanta, I thought, well, if I don't start doing this now, I'm going to find myself at the end of my life very bitter for not having at least tried. So I decided that I would take a class, and there's a wonderful writer in Atlanta. His name is David Fulmer, and he was conducting a writing class at the Margaret Mitchell House in Atlanta. And so at the end of the day, when at Easter Seals, I took the train to downtown, and every Monday for several weeks I attended this class. And it was because what you don't know is, am I any good? I think that there are some people who you think you might have the ability, and what I didn't know is if I had potential. And the feedback that I got in that class really gave me the emotional support to move forward. And so from there, I joined the Atlanta Writers Club. I would go to their meetings. I read, I wrote, I joined a critique group, and just surrounded myself with a community that would help support me writing forward. I know the very first, the second class I attended at the Margaret Mitchell House, after the first class, there was an assignment. So we had to write something. And I was in a room with, all of these people. And I'm accustomed, to talking, in front of people, but about, non-related writing things. And I was the very first person that he picked to have to read what I had written. And I was terrified. I was shaking so badly that I had to press my elbows into the table to steady the paper. It was that terrifying. But I look back on it now. I think it's because I was just so desperate to have potential and to be good enough to write. And and I wanted to be judged positively in that moment.
Yes, makes perfect sense to me. Yeah, your nervousness was, oh my God, are they going to accept me?
It was terrifying. I know.
Are they going to see me the way I want to be seen?
Right.
It's an awful place to be. We all have to go through it, though. That's how you get to where you want to be.
You have to put yourself out there, and that's what's so interesting about this journey with publication is that people are reading advanced copies, people are doing reviews. So far, people have been kind. But it is terrifying to be judged in that way. And I've had many writer friends say, don't read the reviews. You'll just go mad. Don't read the reviews. I've been reading the reviews because I can't help myself. And they've been helpful, and they've been kind. And to help me sort of get my head around reviews, I went through, on Amazon, through some of the greatest novels ever written, to look to see how they were reviewed. And it's remarkable, on a scale, on a 5-star scale, people give To Kill a Mockingbird 1 star. Of course, these are bitter, awful people that would do that. So that puts that into perspective for me, right? Not everyone's going to love your work, but there will be people that do. And those are the people that you want your book to find its way to.
Yeah, it's criticism does tend to reflect the critic as much as it does whatever's being criticized.
Absolutely, especially today. I like what you said. I think that that how people view a work of art, no matter what it might be, really has a lot to say about themselves. Really, it is, and that's so true. And I think that today we're given so many opportunities to have a voice, and people abuse that.
You will almost certainly have an influence on people's lives because of what you've written when they read your book.
Yeah, that's an amazing revelation.
You can't even think about that really when you're writing.
Think about it. No, you don't. And I think, and now I'm in this place where it's going to be making its way out of the world. And I thought, well, what did I think of? I was going to write a book and no one would read it. I never thought about the reader aspect of it. So it is. And first of all, time is so valuable. So if someone chooses to read your book, and that's a gift, I think. And I'm certainly appreciative of anyone who will buy this book and take the time to read it. And gosh, I hope they'll be entertained along the way. But you're right. I had a conversation last night with this amazing writer who lives in Texas. His name is James Wade, and his second book came out this summer, and it's a lovely title. It's called River Sing Out, and it's Gothic and it's sort of Texas noir, I guess you would call it. And it's just beautifully written. And we're talking about literature, and I told him, I said, well, about whether or not his book would have impact on the lives of others. And I said, well, absolutely. I know that literature does impact the lives of others. And I said, and what you probably don't know is that your book is so beautifully written that it inspires me to want to be a better writer. So, yeah, it impacts the world in many different ways.
Well, I think, back at you, your writing is a gift. The world that you have created in the book is an idyllic place, at least in the first half of the book. And it's a place that, it's fun to spend time. And the characters are fun to spend time with the whole time.
Thank you.
And Annalise especially is a delight. This is Scenic Roots Talking Writing. Our guest is Robert Gwaltney, whose first novel, The Cicada Tree, has just been published. You create a world. It's very warm and it's very comforting. Did you find it a challenge to introduce what they say you have to introduce into a story, conflict?
So I think that that's where there's literary fiction, right, with this lovely sort of slice of life where people perceive that there's not conflict. And for me, and today, there's just a lot of conversation, and people want things to happen. They want conflict right away, and they want there to be plot. And I love all of those things. And I wanted to try to balance the literary, with a compelling story that will help move the reader forward. So I think figuring out what that inciting incident is and how quickly it should happen, and for the Cicada Tree, that inciting incident which sets off conflict is that first time that Annalise visits Mistletoe, the home of the Mayfield family, and when she has an odd exchange with Miss Cordelia Mayfield. And so that's and that's the beginning of obsession. And then from there, that's what drives the story forward.
Yeah, it's a bit like Pip and Mrs. Havisham.
Yes, in a way, absolutely.
And while it's, a little disconcerting for Annalise because she's a little girl and she's not used to being treated like that by somebody who has so much more perceived power and is rather haughty. But it's carefully nuanced. As the novel progresses, the conflicts escalate.
Mm-hmm. Annalise just can't seem to win. Which, I think I think we all feel that way sometimes, right? We just can't win. And you don't want your protagonist to win right away. The protagonist has to want something. And that want is not always what they need. It might not align at the end of a story, and you want to see them change in some way across the course of a novel. So making certain that your conflict is significant enough to drive a story forward and to keep a reader reading.
That's interesting. Yeah, because at the same time, as you say, it has to be grounded in a reality, which is that we're talking about a young girl's life and her evolution in the face of these conflicts.
Right. Yeah, I was intentional. I had some choices. I could have told the story present time, in the present tense of Annalise's voice, but the story would have sounded much differently because I tell it. It's an older Annalise looking back on the summer when she was 1956. So by doing that, I have the ability to utilize lovelier language than I might if it were just completely in a child's voice. So I'm able to capture that in dialogue, and trying to get a little girl's dialogue. It could be challenging at times, and I tend to sort of overwrite things, and then I have to pull back, just so it's not quite so florid, and it's believable. But I always say go for it. Just go for it the first time through, because novels are written in editing. They're never written one time through.
So true.
Yeah.
And you had a good editor, I assume.
Yeah. I've had lots of wonderful people. Like I said, early on when I was crafting the story, I had a critique group that I work with and that I still work with. And so by the time that it got to the publisher, it was in pretty darn good shape.
It had been worked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it had been worked over.
And that's interesting. To be honest, Robert, I didn't think about that, but that's the same mode of storytelling in To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yes.
Scout is an adult when she's telling that story.
Right. And it's...
which gives you this nice, as you say, that kind of dual reality. You can go into the moment and see things through her eyes as a child.
Right.
But you can also back out and...
Actually, yeah, and the impact that distance might have even on truth and reliability of information, certainly.
Yes, that kind of, that idyllicism is, that's how we remember it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Would you care to read another part of the novel?
Sure. So let me pull this up. So there's this moment when Annalise arrives outside the gates in their old jalopy truck at the gate before they enter and travel through Mayfield Wood. And Mistletoe is not a place that you can see from the street. Right? I mean, you have to travel a pretty good distance through this park-like environment to actually get to the home. And so this is the moment when they pull up to the gate and they have this odd encounter with Halbert, the Mayfield gatekeeper. I pushed at my door, the old rattletrap refusing to budge. I slid myself across the seat to the steering wheel and hopped down onto the ground. Mama? Get back on up in the truck, Mama said, before you muss yourself. She walked toward the gate, smoothing her floral cotton dress, and pushed at the right side of the gate. It relented, the sound of iron and hinges playing an unsettling chord, pimpling my ankles clean all the way up my back. I tugged at the hem of my yellow gingham dress, trying to pull it to my knees. My legs, refusing to cooperate, had grown longer since Mama sewed it for me just at the start of spring. A man spoke from behind, startling me. Miss Grace? I spun about, my shabby brogans wedging into the rain-softened earth, tipping me off balance. Halbert, sweet Lord Jesus, where have you been? Mama said. My eyes ran the length of the man, stopping at the scar blossoming from the collar of his shirt, growing wider up his neck and gobbling up his ear. He stared back at me when he answered, one eye blinking quicker than the other, a pair of broken baby doll eyes. Been around, he said, turning away his bad side from view. Who's this here? I wanted to take a step backwards, to lay space between us. Mama moved toward me, the sound of gravel crunching beneath her saddle-brown ballet pumps. This here is my daughter, Annalise, she said, laying her hands on my shoulders. Miss Annalise, he said, contemplating the name. You look a bit like your mama. One of his eyes clicked shut and then the other. But it's the eyes that's different. He took a step forward, showing the whole of his misshapen face. I might have seen them eyes before. Who eyes is it you got? I reckon they're my eyes, I said. Mama squeezed my shoulders. How's old Claxton Newell these days? Halbert said, glancing at Mama that time. Still raising hell down on that river? The old man chuckled, his face more gruesome with a smile, his scar pulling his right eye down toward his cheek. Claxton's as drunk and sorry as ever, Mama said. Of course, you know that. Everybody does. The sound of her words shocked me, hard and deliberate, ugly. Mama never spoke ill of Daddy in my presence. That was Miss Wessie's way, not Mama's. Mama was all whispers and door latches. I tried to turn to Mama, to look up into her face, but she held my back firm against her. Halbert nodded at Mama, his awful smile put away. Awkwardness strung together the length of silence until the old man spoke. They done come back, you know. He cupped his hand to his disfigured ear. Can't you hear them? Mama leaned against me. Who's come back, Mama said, her voice weary, the edges dipped in annoyance. Them old locusts, he said. He took another step closer. They got secrets they keep, things they know and keep buried deep down in the ground with them, until they have the mind to come back, to sing out what they know. What kind of secrets? I said. Just listen, he said, lifting his chin. The drone of cicadas rose up around us, stirring fear around my insides like a spoon in a tea glass. Enough of that nonsense, Mama said. You open up that gate. Albert nodded, his eyes out of sync with the movement of his head. Mama nudged me forward. Get back on up in that truck and roll up that window. Mind your secrets, Halbert said. Keep 'em close. Mama eased the truck forward. Slowly, I rolled up the window, taking my time, wanting to hear more. He walked alongside the truck, laughing, his fingers poking in and wiggling at the top of my window, pulling them free just as the glass rolled shut. Above the engine's commotion and the drone of cicadas, he spoke louder. Just listen, he said, drumming his hands against the side of the truck. Just listen.
Worthy of Hitchcock. It struck me that they call it Southern Gothic. And the whole idea of Gothic is of these huge mansions in the UK particularly that are almost unsustainable now.
Right.
That they were built on a false economy. Really.
Downton Abbey-esque, right?
Yes, yeah. Exactly. They're not. It's not the UK economy they were drawing on. They were exploiting other parts of the world. And the same could be said for the Mayfields. Mm-hmm. Land is relatively cheap, I'm assuming, in the town in which it's set.
Right.
So they are able to, as you said, create this park-like environment, this enormous land mass with the house that's,
right,
as you said, big enough for the town.
Exactly, and they've been there forever, the Mayfields.
It's been there generations.
Yes.
And if we accept the notion that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts, absolutely.
Of course.
This is what's happened.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, there's, they own, their wealth and power, extends beyond Providence, Georgia. There's this gala that the town comes to include the governor, and there's even a special appearance by Miss Joanne Woodward, who, before she married Paul Newman, who was childhood friends with Cordelia Mayfield. And people reference that. They say, how odd that you had Joanne Woodward in your novel. And so it's interesting. I grew up in Cairo, Georgia, and Joanne Woodward, I think, was born and lived for a time in Thomasville, Georgia, which was just like 30 minutes over. And so she and her husband, Paul Newman, would come to town on occasion. There's this huge Rose Show parade that happens in Thomasville, Georgia, and she was in it once, I believe. And I had a childhood friend whose family, they were from Sweden, moved. I think it's called Beached in Georgia, and there's this old plantation called Susina, and they purchased it and they renovated it and turned it into an inn. And Joanne Woodward and Paul Newman stayed there. So I was fascinated by that, to know that you had these renowned individuals, these celebrities who were just so close, within my periphery, and so I had to put Joanne Woodward in the novel.
That notion that your story exists in the imagination, and so you had quite a lot of license in terms of stretching reality. That's part of the trope of a Southern Gothic novel, right?
Absolutely, right, exactly. Well, and of course, there's a certain amount of world building that goes into it, and I don't know that I say that the novel has Southern Gothic tendencies with elements of magical realism, because I think I did play with genre a bit. There is a professor who read the book, and he felt like that I could strongly assert that it is Southern Gothic. And I think that there are elements too where I kind of tip my toe maybe into the outer edges of horror. But Gothic does, there's elements of the grotesque in Southern Gothic literature. So, and elements of the supernatural. So there's a lot to play with there. There's nothing better than old decaying mansions and crazy people.
Robert Gwaltney's first novel, just published, is The Cicada Tree. This is Scenic Roots, Talking Writing, on listener-supported public radio in Chattanooga.